The screaming never stopped in the warp. It echoed through the twisted corridors of the Incarnadine Maw, a sound that had long since ceased to be merely auditory. It was a presence, a living thing that crawled through the vents and seeped into the bones of every soul aboard the ancient battle cruiser. Vorthak the Fleshrender had grown to love that sound over the centuries of his damnation. Standing upon the command throne of his flagship, Vorthak surveyed the writhing chaos beyond the reinforced viewing ports. The warp storm they rode was particularly violent today, its impossible colors painting the bridge in hues that mortal eyes were never meant to perceive. Tendrils of unreality lashed against the Geller field, each impact sending ripples of psychic feedback through the ship's corrupted machine spirits. Vorthak himself was no longer entirely human, though fragments of his former self remained like shards of glass embedded in rotting flesh. His power armor, once the proud ceramite of a loyal space marine, now pulsed with organic growths. Cables and tendons had fused with the sacred machinery, creating a hybrid of flesh and metal that breathed with its own malevolent life. From his left shoulder sprouted a cluster of eyes, each one seeing into different layers of reality, while his right arm had been replaced entirely by a writhing mass of tentacles that ended in gnashing mouths. The bridge around him was a cathedral of corruption. What had once been clean imperial architecture now resembled the inside of some vast organism. The walls wept blood that never dried, pooling in channels carved by centuries of ritual sacrifice. Server skulls hung from chains like grisly trophies, their eye sockets weeping tears of molten gold. The command crew, once proud Imperial Navy officers, had long since been transformed into something far more useful. Navigator Zephyrin stood at his station, his third eye permanently opened and weeping acidic tears that had carved furrows down his face. The mutation had spread across his skull like a crown of bone spikes, and his original eyes had been replaced with compound orbs that reflected the warp's maddening light. His hands, no longer truly hands, but clusters of grasping digits, danced across instruments that pulsed with their own heartbeat. "My lord," Zephyrin's voice was a harmony of screams, the hunt spirit's whisper of prey ahead. Something pure, something untainted. Vorthak's lipless mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. The expression was horrific on his partially flensed face, revealing rows of teeth that had grown in impossible configurations. "How delightful! It has been far too long since we've tasted virgin fear." The Incarnadine Maw was not alone in its hunt. 3 other vessels made up Vorthak's fleet, each a masterpiece of corruption in its own right. The Weeping Wound was a heavy cruiser whose hull had been replaced by a living membrane that contracted and expanded like breathing skin. The Screaming Void was a destroyer whose every surface was covered in mouths that sang hymns of destruction. And finally, the Plague Heart, a light cruiser that had been blessed by Nurgle himself, its corridors crawling with diseases that had names in languages that predated human speech. Together, they formed the Crimson Harvest, a pack of predators that had stalked the shipping lanes of the Segmentum Solar for over 3 centuries. They were ghosts in the night, appearing from the warp to savage merchant vessels and military convoys alike. Their holds were filled with the screaming souls of 10,000 victims, each one an offering to the dark gods who had blessed their unholy crusade. "Orders, my lord." The voice belonged to Mordecai the Flayed, Vorthak's second in command. The former apothecary had embraced his new role with enthusiasm, his medical knowledge proving invaluable in keeping their victims alive during the prolonged rituals of torment. His armor was decorated with the preserved faces of his favorite subjects, each one still capable of expression despite their separation from their former bodies. "Signal the fleet," Vorthak commanded, his voice carrying the authority of centuries of slaughter. "We move to intercept. And Mordecai, prepare the boarding parties. I want this prey taken alive. The gods hunger for fresh screams." The Incarnadine Maw shuddered as its corrupted engines responded to the command. In the depths of the ship, bound demons shrieked as they were forced to provide power to the vessel's systems. The warp around them began to part, reality asserting itself in violent waves as they prepared to translate back to normal space. Through the psychic network that bound his fleet, Vorthak could feel the anticipation of his followers. Hundreds of Chaos Space Marines, thousands of cultists, and numberless demons all shared in the hunger for what was to come. The ship's weapon systems came online with sounds like breaking bones, and the targeting spirits began their eager chant. Translation in 30 seconds, my lord, reported Tech Marine's Ulkoth, his voice emerging from speakers grafted directly into his throat. Half of his skull had been replaced with a mechanical construct that allowed him to interface directly with the ship's machine spirits. Wires and cables emerged from his spine like the legs of some mechanical spider, each one pulsing with corrupt data. The transition from warp to real space was violent, as it always was aboard ships blessed by chaos. The hull screamed as dimensional barriers collapsed, and several of the lesser crew members burst like overripe fruit as their minds failed to process the shift. Their remains were immediately consumed by the ship's living walls, waste not being something that the followers of chaos could afford. And there, hanging in the void like a silver teardrop, was their prey. The Tau vessel was sleek and clean, its hull unmarked by the corruption that defined Imperial ships. It was a messenger-class cruiser designed for long-range exploration and diplomatic missions. Even from this distance, Vorthak could sense the ordered minds aboard, their thoughts flowing in patterns of logic and reason that were anathema to the chaos that flowed through his veins. Beautiful, he whispered, and the word was filled with such hunger that several of the bridge crew began to weep tears of black blood. So pure, so innocent, they have no idea what approaches them. The Tau ship had clearly detected their arrival. Its engines flared to life as it attempted to flee, but it was already too late. The Crimson Harvest had emerged from the warp in a perfect ambush formation, their prey caught in a web of destruction from which there could be no escape. Target their engines, Vorthak commanded. Disable them, but do not destroy. I want to hear them scream as we board. The Incarnadine Moor's weapon batteries opened fire with a sound like thunder. Lance batteries sent beams of coherent energy across the void, their light twisted into spectra that hurt to perceive. Macro cannons hurled shells the size of hab blocks, each one inscribed with blasphemous runes that screamed as they flew through space. The Tau vessel's shields flared as they absorbed the initial barrage, but they were designed to deflect conventional Imperial weapons, not the reality-warping munitions of chaos. The first lance strike punched through their defenses like they were made of paper, carving a molten gash along the cruiser's flank. The second volley found their engine housing, and secondary explosions bloomed like flowers of fire across the vessel's stern. They're attempting to send a distress signal, reported Communications Officer Thex, her voice emerging from the Vox grill that had replaced her mouth. Her head had been opened like a flower, revealing the pulsing brain matter within, and wires snaked directly into her gray matter to interface with the ship's communication systems. Jam it, Vorthak ordered. No one will hear their screams but us. The other ships of the Crimson Harvest had spread out to surround their prey, their weapons adding to the devastating barrage. The Weeping Wound's living hull pulsed as it fired spores filled with acidic enzymes that began eating through the Tau ship's armor. The screaming void launched boarding torpedoes that sang hymns of corruption as they crossed the void. And the Plague Heart released clouds of virulent gas that would seep through any breach in the enemy's hull. The Tau fought back with desperate courage, their pulse weapons sending streams of plasma across space. But their shots were clean and precise, following the laws of physics rather than the chaotic geometries that governed chaos weaponry. Most of their fire was absorbed harmlessly by the Incarnadine Moor's corrupted void shields, while the few hits that penetrated merely fed the hungry metal of the ship's hull. They're launching escape pods, Zephalin reported, his compound eyes tracking the small craft as they fled from the dying vessel. Shall we destroy them? No, Vorthak said, his smile widening to reveal the smaller mouths that had grown among his teeth. Let them run. Fear is a seasoning that improves with age. We'll collect them after we've finished with the main course. The Tau cruiser was listing now, its elegant lines broken by the wounds inflicted by the Chaos Fleet. Atmosphere vented from dozens of breaches, carrying with it the screams of the dying. Emergency lights flickered across its hull like the last gasps of a dying animal. Boarding range achieved, Mordecai reported. Shall I deploy the assault craft? Yes, Vorthak breathed, the word carrying with it the weight of centuries of anticipation. Begin the harvest. The sides of the Incarnadine more opened like a wound, revealing the launch bays within. Dozens of assault craft emerged, each one a masterpiece of corruption. Some were traditional thunderhawks, their hulls decorated with screaming faces and powered by the anguish of bound souls. Others were more exotic creations, living ships that had been birthed in the spawning pits of demon worlds. Leading the assault was Vorthak himself, his massive form squeezed into a custom boarding pod that had been grown rather than built. The interior was lined with neural fibers that connected directly to his spinal column, allowing him to feel every impact as they crossed the void toward their prey. Behind him came the cream of his warband, 50 Chaos Space Marines who had fought at his side for centuries. Each one was a unique horror, their forms twisted by the gifts of the dark gods. Karvek, the bloodletter, had arms that ended in bone scythes, perfect for reaping the lives of the innocent. Next, the Faceless wore a helm that was actually a demon bound to his skull, whispering the locations of enemies through his inner ear. Gorvex, the Pustulant, wept tears of acid that could melt through armor, while Zephon the Twice-Cursed could see through the eyes of anyone who looked upon his scarred face. The boarding pod struck the Tau ship with the force of a meteorite, its impact sending shockwaves through the vessel's hull. Melter charges detonated in sequence, carving through the alien metal like it was flesh. The pod's front section opened like a flower, revealing the nightmare within. Vorthak emerged first, his massive form filling the breach. The corridor beyond was pristine white, lit by clean, efficient lighting that hurt his eyes after centuries in the darkness. Emergency klaxons wailed, and he could hear the sound of running footsteps as the crew responded to the breach. Such cleanliness, he mused, running one of his tentacles along the wall. Where it touched, the metal began to corrode, spreading like a disease through the ship's structure. It will be a pleasure to remedy this. The first Tau appeared at the far end of the corridor, a fire warrior in combat armor that gleamed with technological perfection. The alien raised his pulse rifle, its barrel glowing with contained energy. Vorthak moved faster than something his size should have been able to, crossing the distance in a single bound. His power claw, a weapon that had been blessed by all four dark gods, tore through the fire warrior's armor like it was paper. The alien's blue blood sprayed across the walls in patterns that pleased the eye, and his death scream was like music to Vorthak's ears. Forward, he bellowed, his voice echoing through the ship's corridors. Let none escape. The gods demand a tithe of souls. The corridors of the Tau ship became a slaughterhouse as the Chaos Space Marines advanced. They moved through the clean, efficient passages like a plague, leaving corruption in their wake. Where they walked, the walls began to bleed. Where they breathed, the air became thick with the scent of decay. And where they killed, the very fabric of reality grew thin. The Tau fought back with admirable courage, but they were hopelessly outmatched. Their pulse weapons, deadly against conventional foes, barely scratched the corrupted ceramite of Chaos power armor. Their drones, marvels of artificial intelligence, screamed in electronic agony as they were possessed by minor demons. And their tactics, perfect for conventional warfare, were useless against enemies who defied the laws of physics. Vorthak led the advance personally, his massive form carving through the defenders like a ship through water. His power claw tore through armor and flesh with equal ease, while his tentacles wrapped around fleeing Tau and pulled them close for more intimate forms of destruction. Each kill fed the hunger that gnawed at his soul, and with each life taken, he felt the approval of the dark gods. The ship's corridor junction became a charnel house as a squad of Tau pathfinders attempted to make a stand. They had set up a defensive position behind overturned cargo containers, their markerites painting targeting solutions across the advancing Chaos Marines. For a moment, It seemed as though their disciplined fire might slow the assault. Then Karvek, the bloodletter, reached them. The Chaos Marine had once been known for his precision and tactical acumen, but centuries of exposure to Khorne's influence had burned away everything except the desire to kill. His bone scythes, grown from his own mutated skeleton, sang through the air with lethal grace. The first Pathfinder died before he could scream, his head separated from his shoulders by a blow that moved faster than thought. The second managed a cry of alarm before Karvek's return stroke opened him from sternum to spine. The remaining Tau scattered, their disciplined formation collapsing into chaos. But there was no escape in the narrow confines of the ship's corridors. Next, the Faceless appeared behind them, moving through shadows that shouldn't have existed. His demonic helm whispered the locations of the fleeing aliens, and his bolt pistols spoke with the voice of damnation. Each round was inscribed with the true names of minor demons, and where they struck, corruption bloomed like flowers of disease. "Please," gasped one of the wounded Pathfinders, his legs crushed beneath fallen debris. Blue blood frothed from his mouth, and his eyes were wide with terror. "Please, we surrender." Vorthak knelt beside the dying alien, his massive form blocking out the corridor's lighting. Up close, the Tau's features were delicate, almost childlike in their innocence. It was a face that had never known true suffering, had never witnessed the creative cruelties that flourished in the galaxy's darker corners. "Surrender," Vorthak's voice was gentle, almost kind. "Oh, my dear creature, you misunderstand. We are not here for your surrender. We are here for your souls." The Tau's scream was cut short as Vorthak's tentacles wrapped around his throat. But instead of crushing the life from him, they began to burrow into his flesh, seeking the pathways of nerve and sinew that would allow for the most exquisite torment. The alien's eyes rolled back in his head as alien sensations flooded his nervous system, pleasures and pains that his species had never evolved to comprehend. "Mordecai," Vorthak called over the ship's Vox system, "I have a gift for you, something fresh and untainted. Do try to keep it alive for as long as possible." The former apothecary's laughter echoed through the corridors, a sound like breaking glass mixed with children's sobs. "It will be my pleasure, my lord. I have such wonderful new techniques to try." The advance continued deeper into the ship, each corridor conquered, adding to the tally of the slain. The Tau had regrouped in the ship's central hub, a spherical chamber that served as both command center and spiritual heart of their vessel. It was here that they would make their final stand, surrounded by the clean lines and efficient architecture of their civilization. Commander Shassel Ors Koyon stood at the center of the chamber, his crisis suit gleaming with technological perfection. Around him, the last of his crew had formed a defensive perimeter, their weapons trained on the entrances to the chamber. They knew they were going to die, but they would face death with the stoic courage that was the hallmark of their people. "All units, prepare for final assault." The commander's voice was calm despite the circumstances. "For the greater good. For the greater good," his warriors echoed, their voices carrying the weight of absolute conviction. The first breach came from above, as Gorvex the Pustulant melted through the chamber's ceiling with his acidic tears. He dropped into the center of the defensive formation like a falling star, his diseased bulk crushing two fire warriors beneath his weight. His presence was like a plague made manifest, and those who breathed too deeply of the air around him began to cough up blood and bile. The second breach came from the main entrance, as Vorthak's power claw tore through the reinforced blast doors like they were made of paper. The massive Chaos Champion filled the doorway, his form so imposing that several of the younger fire warriors fell to their knees in instinctive terror. Behind him came the rest of his warband, their weapons singing hymns of destruction. The battle that followed was less a fight than a massacre. The Tau fought with desperate courage, their pulse weapons carving smoking wounds in corrupted armor. But for every minor wound they inflicted, they paid with screams and blood. The Chaos Marines moved through their ranks like reapers through wheat, their weapons blessed by gods who delighted in slaughter. Commander Ors Koyon lasted the longest, his crisis suit's advanced systems allowing him to dance between the grasping claws of his enemies. His fusion blaster carved molten holes in the chamber's walls, and his missile pods painted the ceiling with shrapnel. For a brief moment, it seemed as though his tactical genius might turn the tide. Then Vorthak reached him. The Chaos Champion moved with impossible speed, his massive form covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. His power claw caught the crisis suit's left arm, the energy field disrupting the battlesuit systems and causing cascade failures throughout its neural network. The commander's scream was audible even through his suit's speakers as feedback burned through his nervous system. "Magnificent," Vorthak breathed, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. "Such courage, such determination, it will make your corruption all the more satisfying." The crisis suit systems failed one by one, its advanced technology unable to cope with the reality-warping presence of its captor. The commander tried to activate his suit's self-destruct, but Vorthak's tentacles had already wormed their way into the battlesuit's control systems, overriding its safeguards with whispered blasphemies. "No," Koyon gasped as his suit's life support began to fail. "I will not, I cannot." "You can," Vorthak assured him, his tone almost paternal. "You will. In time, you will beg for the privilege of serving us. The gods are patient, and their gifts are generous to those who embrace them." The chamber fell silent, except for the moans of the wounded and the wet sounds of the dying. The last defenders of the Tau vessel had fallen, their blood mixing with the alien fluids that leaked from damaged systems. The air was thick, with the scent of ozone and burned meat, and the clean white walls were painted with abstract patterns of violence. "Signal the fleet," Vorthak commanded, his voice carrying easily through the ship's compromised communication system. "The vessel is secured. Begin the harvest." What followed was systematic and thorough. The Chaos Marines spread throughout the ship like a virus, seeking out every hidden compartment and sealed chamber. Those crew members who had survived the initial assault were dragged from their hiding places, their screams echoing through corridors that were already beginning to change as the ship's structure responded to the presence of chaos. The ship's artificial intelligence, a marvel of Tau technology, lasted less than an hour before it was possessed by a demon of Tzeentch. Its electronic screams could be heard through every speaker on the vessel as its ordered thoughts were replaced by the impossible geometries of chaos mathematics. The ship's lights began to flicker in patterns that hurt to look at, and the temperature controls malfunctioned, creating pockets of extreme heat and cold that served no purpose except to increase suffering. In the ship's medical bay, Mordecai the Flayed had set up his portable laboratory. The sterile white surfaces were soon painted with substances that had no names in any living language, and the air filled with screams that were music to his ears. He worked with the precision of a master craftsman, each incision placed with surgical accuracy to maximize both pain and the duration of consciousness. His first subject was a young fire warrior who had been found hiding in a maintenance shaft. The alien's natural blue pigmentation had faded to a sickly gray, and his eyes were wide with terror as he was strapped to the examination table. Mordecai began by carefully removing the warrior's fingernails, each one extracted with the precision of a surgeon and the enthusiasm of an artist. "Such interesting physiology," the former apothecary mused as he worked. "The nerve density is quite remarkable. I wonder how long you can maintain consciousness while I explore your internal architecture." The fire warrior's screams were cut short as Mordecai inserted a neural inhibitor into his spinal column. The device, a relic of Dark Age technology corrupted by centuries of exposure to chaos, would keep the subject alive and aware while preventing him from losing consciousness. It was a gift that Mordecai reserved for his most promising specimens. Meanwhile, in the ship's cargo hold, other members of the warband were conducting their own investigations. The hold contained samples of Tau technology, scientific specimens, and diplomatic gifts intended for some far-off world. All of it would be corrupted and repurposed, transformed from tools of progress into instruments of damnation. Zephon the Twice Cursed had discovered the ship's databanks, massive crystalline structures that contained the accumulated knowledge of a dozen worlds. His scarred face reflected in their surfaces as he began the ritual that would bind them to his will. The information they contained would be invaluable intelligence on Tau movements and capabilities, but more importantly, it would provide new subjects for future hunts. Such a wealth of knowledge, he whispered, his voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal matrices resonate in sympathy. So many names, so many locations, the harvest will be bountiful indeed. The process of corrupting the ship's structure had begun as well. Where the Chaos Marines walked, the clean lines of Tau architecture began to twist into more organic shapes. The walls developed a rough, organic texture like skin, and the floor became spongy underfoot. Veins of some dark substance began to spread through the ship's infrastructure, carrying with them a corruption that would eventually transform the vessel into a living thing. It was during this process that they discovered the ship's most precious cargo. Deep in the vessel's core, protected by layers of armor and shielding, was a stasis chamber. Within it lay a single figure, her form preserved in temporal suspension. She was obviously important, her robes marking her as a member of the Ethereal caste, the philosophical leaders of the Tau Empire. "What have we here?" Vorthak mused as he studied the sleeping figure. Even in stasis, her face was serene, unmarked by the fears and sorrows that plagued lesser beings. Her skin had the pale blue tint of her people, and her features were delicate to the point of fragility. "The ship's records indicate she is Ornal Myen," reported Zephon, his scarred eyes reflecting the stasis chamber's glow. "A diplomatic envoy traveling to the Purdus Rift. Her mission was to negotiate a ceasefire with the local Imperial forces." "How peaceful," Vorthak said, and the word was filled with such contempt that several of the nearby cultists fell to their knees in instinctive worship. "How naive to believe that words could stop the tide of war that has consumed the galaxy for 10,000 years. He reached out with one of his tentacles, letting it caress the surface of the stasis field. Where it touched, the energy barrier flickered and began to fail. The Ethereal's eyes fluttered open, confusion replacing the serene peace of her artificial sleep. "Where?" she began, her voice soft and melodious despite her circumstances. "What has happened to my ship?" "Your ship has been blessed," Vorthak replied, his tone gentle and reasonable. "As have you, though you do not yet understand the nature of that blessing." The Ethereal's gaze fixed on his corrupted form, and for a moment her composure cracked. She was seeing something that her ordered mind could not fully process, a being that existed in defiance of the natural laws that governed her understanding of the universe. "You are human," she whispered, and there was something like pity in her voice. "What has been done to you?" "I have been elevated," Vorthak said, his smile revealing the rows of teeth that had grown within his skull. "I have been shown truths that your limited perspective cannot comprehend, but you will learn in time. The gods are patient teachers." The stasis chamber's final safeguards failed, and the Ethereal was able to step out onto the corrupted deck. She was smaller than he had expected, her form graceful despite the circumstances. Her robes, which had once been pristine white, were already beginning to show stains where the ship's changed atmosphere touched them. "I demand to speak with whoever is in command," she said, her voice carrying the authority of one who was accustomed to being obeyed. "This assault is a violation of the Treaty of Damocles. The Imperium will hear of this." "The Imperium?" Vorthak's laughter was like the sound of breaking glass mixed with children's tears. "Oh, my dear child, we are so very far beyond the reach of the Imperium. So very far beyond the reach of your precious greater good." To demonstrate his point, he gestured toward one of the chamber's viewing ports. Beyond the transparent aluminum, the warp writhed in colors that had no names. Impossible geometries twisted through dimensions that mortal minds could not comprehend, and in the distance, shapes that might have been islands or predators swam through the sea of souls. "Welcome to the realm of chaos," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "Welcome to the place where all philosophies come to die." The Ethereal's composure finally shattered as she realized the full scope of her situation. This was not a simple raid or act of piracy. This was something far worse, something that struck at the very foundations of everything she believed about the universe. The greater good will prevail, she whispered, the words more prayer than statement. It must, the alternative is. The alternative is truth, Vorthak finished for her. The alternative is accepting that the universe is not the ordered place your people believe it to be. It is a realm of hunger and desire, of passion and pain. And you, my dear Ethereal, are about to receive a very thorough education in its realities. He gestured to Mordecai, who approached with the eager gait of a scholar presented with a particularly interesting specimen. The former apothecary's medical instruments gleamed in the chamber's failing light, each one designed for purposes that had nothing to do with healing. "Please," the Ethereal said, her voice breaking for the first time. Vorthak stared at her amused suffering, true, exquisite suffering that requires a living subject. And you, my dear, are going to help us explore the very limits of what it means to be alive. The harvest continued for 3 more days, ship time. Every corner of the Tau vessel was explored, every secret extracted, every soul claimed for the dark gods. The ship itself was transformed in the process, its clean lines becoming twisted into shapes that pleased the eye in ways that geometry alone could not explain. The escape pods that had fled during the initial attack were collected one by one, their occupants added to the tally of the damned. Some were kept alive for the pleasure of the crew, while others were sacrificed in rituals that opened doorways to realms where mathematics wept and physics screamed. When it was finally over, the Tau vessel had become something entirely new. Its hull pulsed with its own heartbeat, and its corridors echoed with the voices of the damned. It would serve as a tender to the crimson harvest, its holds filled with the screaming souls that were the currency of chaos. Vorthak stood once more upon the bridge of the Incarnadine Moor, his form silhouetted against the impossible vista of the warp. The hunt had been successful beyond his wildest dreams, and the approval of the dark gods flowed through him like warm honey. His ship's machine spirits sang hymns of praise, and the very air around him shimmered with barely contained power. "Where to next, my lord?" asked Zephalon, his compound eyes reflecting the madness beyond the viewing ports. The hunt spirits whisper of rich hunting grounds in the Segmentum Pacificus. "Yes," Vorthak mused, his tentacles writhing with anticipation. "I sense great potential there, so many souls, so many opportunities for enlightenment. Signal the fleet, we depart within the hour." As the Crimson Harvest prepared to dive once more into the warp's embrace, Vorthak allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The galaxy was vast, filled with billions of souls who had yet to experience the truth of chaos. Each one was a potential convert, a future servant of the dark gods, and he had eternity to find them all. The screaming in the ship's corridors grew louder as they prepared for translation, the voices of the newly damned joining the chorus of the eternally tormented. It was music to Vorthak's ears, a symphony of suffering that spoke to the deepest truths of existence. In the depths of the ship, in chambers that existed in more dimensions than mortal geometry allowed, the Ethereal learned the first of many lessons about the nature of reality. Her screams added a new note to the symphony, a high, pure sound that cut through the deeper tones of despair like a blade through silk. "The greater good," she whispered between sessions, the words becoming a mantra that she clung to like a drowning woman clings to driftwood. "The greater good will prevail." But even she was beginning to doubt, and doubt was the first step toward damnation. The warp embraced them like a lover, its impossible currents carrying them toward new hunting grounds and fresh prey. Behind them, the ghost of the Tau vessel's former self lingered in the immaterium, a psychic imprint of order and purpose that was slowly being devoured by the hungering darkness. And in the distance, barely visible through the warp's chaotic magnificence, other ships moved through the sea of souls. Some were prey, waiting to be harvested. Others were predators like themselves, servants of the dark gods who had their own hungers to satisfy. But all of them, prey and predator alike, were part of the same vast ecosystem of suffering and desire that had consumed the galaxy. All of them were dancers, in the eternal ballet of damnation that had been choreographed by powers older than humanity itself. Vorthak smiled as he contemplated the hunts to come, his malformed features twisted into an expression of pure anticipation. The universe was vast, but it was not infinite. Someday, every soul would know the truth of chaos. Someday, every world would burn with the fires of revelation. And he would be there to see it all, to participate in the great work of corruption that was the birthright of those who served the dark gods. It was a thought that filled him with joy so pure that several of the bridge crew began to weep tears of liquid ecstasy. The hunt continued, as it always had and always would. It was the heartbeat of the galaxy, the rhythm to which all life danced its brief and violent dance before joining the eternal chorus of the damned.
Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this Grim Tales 40K story. Like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more.